Hey guys, what's up and welcome to another episode of the TheGoodCastShow. So before we begin, a big thank you to our collaborators for this one, Penguin Southeast Asia. We have many interviews that we have done before with amazing authors with books that have been published by them, and we have more coming your way. And today is no exception. It's a fantastic book that we'll be discussing on, more closer to home actually. My guest today is a novelist, poet, rapper, storyteller, and visual artist. He's known for blending the personal with the political, the intimate with the epic. And his latest novel, Fierceland, he creates a work that feels both urgently contemporary and timeless. Set between the rainforests of Sabah and the cities of Sydney and Los Angeles, Fierceland is a haunting family saga about inheritance, identity, and the moral cost of progress. It grapples with the destruction of the Bornean rainforest, the legacy of colonialism, and the quiet forms of complicity that shape our very lives, all while giving voice to land, language, and ghosts that refuse to be forgotten. Today, we'll be talking to Omar about the origins of this novel, the political and environmental forces at its core, and why he believes stories, especially stories from the margins, can shift the way we see the world. So please welcome the amazing Omar Musa. Welcome to the show, Omar.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, man.
Hey, love it, man. I loved all your, as I was telling you just now, I'm a big fan of your previous interviews, so you must come back. We must discuss different topics. But today, it's about Fierceland, your latest book. So let's start with the title. Why the title Fierceland?
Fierceland, well, this is kind of a crazy story, actually, and it's good to get to the heart of it. So while I was researching this book, I did so much research, including like just traveling all around Sabah, traveling around the world, including Nigeria, but just reading countless books. So I was in the library back in Canberra in Australia, and I found this dusty dissertation, long abandoned or forgotten by an American academic about my Nenex people, the Kadayan people from the border of Sabah, Sarawak, and Brunei. And there was this amazing story in there about an ancestor of ours called the Fierce One, who was so strong that he could use the entire trunk of a tree as a blowpipe, and he was like trying to shoot out the stars. And the stars were dropping from the sky, and he wanted to see where they had landed. So he went on this like epic journey, and everywhere that he traveled through, he called it Fierceland, right? So I write this down. I'm like, this is amazing. This is so cool. I'm going to use this one day. Years later, I'm trying to put it into this novel. And I was like, man, I should have taken a photocopy of this dissertation, you know. So I go back to the library. I upend the whole library looking for this thing. I go in the library system. I search for it. There's nothing comes up about this dissertation. I go online. I look up every resource I can. I Google it. Fierceland, Kadayan people, the Fierce One. It never turned up ever again. I started to question myself, started to question my faulty memory. Like, did this happen? Did I dream it? Was I high? You know, did I have it? You know, did someone tell it to me in a dream, and then I sort of reshaped it as a memory? And so this started to be very interesting to me. I was just like, wow, memory is faulty, you know. And perhaps the fact is, it doesn't matter whether Fierceland existed or not. It now exists because I spoke it into existence, and I have created my own mythology. And of course, since then, I've found that there are many myths that are quite similar to that, especially about the warrior Awang Simaun, but no other time, Fierceland or the Fierce One. So I thought, this is interesting.
Okay.
And
But let's give some context to our discussion now. I think people who are watching may be interested to know about your heritage.
Sure.
So maybe please elaborate on that a bit. Where do you come from?
Yeah, so my father is from Sabah. He's actually from Kampung Air there, called Simsim in Sandakan. He grew up there. He is a blend of Suluk and Kadayan with a little smattering of Bugis and Chinese in there.
My goodness, what a mix.
Yeah, what a mix, exactly. And then it gets even more complex because he married my mother. They met actually in Penang, but she is Irish-Australian. So I've got that whole
mix.
Whirling blend in there. And that's definitely like informed my work.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I was born and raised in Australia, but I've always had deep roots in Sabah and a deep connection with the place. Went a few times as a kid, and then as an adult, probably from like 19, 20 onwards, started going back once or twice a year. So it's a place that like has a really special, resonant place in my heart. But it's also those conflicted kind of mistranslations, misunderstandings, longings for the homeland that build up a kind of complex matrix that I like to explore in my work.
In this book, you have many characters. Are these characters based on real people in your life? Like, for example, the auntie character in this, and then, the father and all that?
Definitely. I think the ones that are most resonant are Crazy Auntie, who's this kind of...
I love her. She's my favorite.
Yeah, good. Yeah. I think in some ways she's like the moral heart of the book. And she calls herself Crazy Auntie as well. Because her whole point is that sometimes the crazy person in the kampong is not actually crazy. It's the kampong that's crazy, and it makes them seem mad, you know? And obviously there's broader social and political connotations for that here and in Australia. But she was sort of reflecting a certain type of person that I know that was like a Malaysian person that often moved abroad, let's say to study in Australia on a Colombo Plan scholarship, but never could quite detach themselves from their dream of Malaysia. Like they had kind of rose-tinted glasses, let's say, a certain type of longing and maybe even optimism for a nation in the post-independence era, only to see it from afar fall into venality and corruption and that kind of disillusionment that accompanies that.
Yeah.
But then oftentimes, you know, they did not find a place for themselves in Australia either, because Australia, you know, it's a famously racist country.
It is, and you have said that a lot on interviews as well.
Well, it's true. I mean, I think it's true. Like the way that Australia, you know, treats refugees and all of these types of policies. I mean, even there are the deep roots of that, the dispossession of Aboriginal people. From 1901 to 1975, we literally had a thing called the White Australia policy, where only white people were allowed to migrate to Australia. These things run deep. So,
do you think that these ideologies are still in practice today?
Oh, I mean,
maybe covertly.
I mean, 100%. I think the dog whistle that's often used, anti-migrant rhetoric that's used in Australia, it always seems to resonate with a lot of voters, a lot of Australians. Even seeing Islamophobia running rampant, especially post 9/11. But that's not a new thing. That sort of plugs into these deep well springs, I would say, of xenophobia in Australia. And then even something like the voice to Parliament, recognising Aboriginal people in the Constitution, the referendum, and all the horrendous racist stuff around that. Yeah, it's still there. And I think Australia is a country that is sort of stuck in molasses in a lot of ways because of its inability to deal with the ghosts of the past. And so, therefore, it can't sort of grow into its own selfhood, I think. And I think it's a shame because it doesn't have to be that way. We're in the middle of the Asia Pacific. Actually, we should be way more part of our region. But here we are with the flag of another nation across the other side of the world on our flag. The monarch of Britain is our head of state. King Charles, for God's sake. That's crazy. How can we go and interact with the nations around us like Indonesia, Malaysia, and say, oh, by the way, actually one of our ex-prime ministers, Paul Keating, always says that, by the way, we treat our Indigenous people really badly. By the way, we got the, flag of another nation on ours. I mean, this is not a modern nation that has sort of come into its own, I would say. Having said that, I am clearly Australian.
Yeah, you are.
You know what I mean? Like, listen to how I talk. I grew up there. I was very privileged to grow up there. We have had a good economy, a comfortable life. You can speak your mind freely there. So there's a lot of positives. But I think that's one of the things is that, I forget who it was that said it. Who's the dude who wrote Huckleberry Finn? Mark Twain.
Yeah.
I think he said... one of the greatest things you can do as somebody who wants to improve their country is to criticize it.
Yeah, definitely.
And so when you hear all this ridiculous jingoism and people saying, like, oh, you shouldn't even be biting the hand that feeds you or criticizing your nation, what could be a better thing to help try and improve it than to look at its flaws and examine them deeply?
Yeah, definitely. Now, I want to get into that because there is a part of the book, of course, in this book where the children come back to the father's funeral.
Yes.
And I want to tie that back to what you just said. But before we go there, I saw this one short clip of you, I think it was in an Australian bookstore, where you said that this book took a lot to finish, including blood, sweat, tears, research, and hard living. Yeah. So tell us the journey that you had to undergo, much like Roz and Harun take in this book to make this book possible.
Yeah, firstly, maybe I should just anchor the listeners. I should have done this earlier in what the theme of what the story of the book is.
Yeah.
So it's about these siblings, Roz and Harun. They grew up in Kota Kinabalu, but they've been away for many years. Roz in Sydney and Harun in LA. And they come back to KK for their father's funeral, Yusuf Mansour. and he's this kind of celebrated rags to riches figure.
A palm oil baron.
Palm oil baron, and a logging baron before that. But as the book kind of proceeds, you realize that he was one of the most corrupt logging and oil palm barons in all of Southeast Asia, one of the richest men in Malaysia, and he potentially disappeared people who stood in his way. Which, of course, story. You told me that you lived in Sarawak before. This is a story that resonates there. It resonates in Sabah. And so this is about how these characters grapple with not just the ghost of their father, but the ghosts of disappeared languages, disappeared rainforests, and colonialism. The British North Borneo Chartered Company. And so I tried to drill deep into the kind of historical and colonial tectonics of Sabah, of Australia, but also, as I mentioned, I went to Nigeria, So this book, I signed a contract for it 11 years ago. 11 years, man. I've put out 2 books of poetry, 2 plays, 2 hip-hop albums in the meantime, while this was marinating in the background. And I think the reason it took so long is because I had to contend with, I had to grapple with my own ghosts. I had to grapple with my bloodline, with my relationship to Sabah, and also with my blind spots, with my privilege, with my own complicity, with my imposter syndrome.
Which you talk about,
As I try to be open about that, because it's sometimes, I think, common for people in the diaspora who have firstly the privilege of writing in English, which has its own kind of privileges when you're presenting it to a worldwide market. But also, these blind spots that you're not aware of, and then it's easy to sort of come back and charge back into your homeland as if you're the font of all knowledge and you have this unique perspective and all this sort of stuff. There is a perspective that comes from that distance and from being in the diaspora, but at the same time, I think you have to be aware, and you have to learn how to shut up and how to listen deeply and ask a lot of questions and have a lot of conversations with a wide range of people, from the local guy in the pasar in the Filipino market to historians, to people working in the political sphere, or people working in palm oil, people who potentially have been, destroying the rainforest and replacing it with a monocrop. I think it took so long because I had to have all these conversations, and I had to also move back to KK. And I guess I just didn't have enough skin in the game at that early point.
Now, interesting you talk about the imposter syndrome, because when I read this book, if I were a Sabahan, say the themes that you tackle in this book are things that will resonate deeply with me. In fact, even me as a Malaysian, these things happen. I see it all the time. But do you think that these things have continued for so long, even till today, present day? What you're talking about still happens.
Yes.
Especially with the current tribes that are migrating within the jungle, who are losing their space to migrate and all that. I think it's called the Penan tribe. If I'm not mistaken.
Penan tribe,
And all this is because people have that imposter syndrome, and most people don't do what you did, which is write a book and really bring this story to the front.
Right.
A lot of people with imposter syndrome tend to hide behind another mask. Say if I were to go to Australia, I would just wear the whole Australian mask and forget this, right?
Right.
Just like Roz and Harun, who, when they left Borneo to do their own thing overseas, it was an escape. Yeah. So do you think that imposters should not focus so much on the imposter syndrome and do what you did?
I think that's right. I mean, because imposter syndrome, one of the main things that it can do is it paralyzes you. It limits your sense of self-worth, so you think that your story perhaps isn't worth telling.
Yeah.
But they all are, And so I instead tried to use that imposter syndrome to fuel me, to read more, research deeper, travel more around Sabah, have more conversations, and then as a result of that, write fiercer. Even with the knowledge that I may stumble, there may be sections of the book where they go, okay, he didn't quite connect on that particular issue. But I think it's worth it.
Yeah.
Because, there are so many amazing stories out there, and important stories in Malaysia, but also especially, I would say, in Sabah and Sarawak. And these are places that have been treated as if they are backwaters.
Yeah.
In the post-independence era, by the British, whatever the case may be, just used as places to be extracted from, exploited, and stories told by other people. So one thing, for instance, in this book, I have a bit of a joke with myself because the famous author Joseph Conrad appears in this book. And probably the most famous fiction book ever written about Borneo is Lord Jim by Joseph Conrad. I would venture to say, maybe your listeners might have some other ideas, but to me that sort of rings true. He also obviously wrote Heart of Darkness, really seminal, famous book. But that was a Polish turned British guy writing about Southeast Asia, and then in Heart of Darkness writing about Africa in a way that foregrounded the lives of the European characters, and especially in Heart of Darkness, backgrounded the African characters, and used the idea of the quote-unquote wilderness and the forest and the jungle as this kind of impressionistic blur in the background, but also as a metaphor for the dark hearts of man, you know. And so what I'm saying here is that when your story is so often told by somebody else, it can diminish and erode your sense of self-worth and your sense of your own story.
Yeah.
And so by
it sort of kills your own identity.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's why, even though I'm totally aware that I am so Australian in so many ways, I hope that a book like this kind of cracks the door a little bit.
But that's interesting that you would think.
Sabahan writers.
Yeah, but that's interesting that you think that way, because I think a lot of us do, right? For example, it always confuses me or amazes me why the human psyche needs to select only one identity. We need to have a primary identity, if not if not the only. Like, for example, like for me, even being a Malaysian, being a person of the Indian race, I have so many influences, and I cannot for sure tell you that if you look back at my lineage, I only come from the Indians.
Yes.
You can never know the answer to that.
For sure.
Like in your case, you have that whole Bornean blood in you, and you also your mom is Irish, and you lived in Australia. Why can't you wear all the hats? Why do you think the human psyche is so obsessed with picking one hat?
I mean, I think a lot of this is related to the nation state, and this idea that you have to distill your identity down into one thing, one essentialized identity. And I think this is very, very dangerous.
It is.
Especially, I would say, in this part of the world.
Exactly.
In Nusantara, in the Malay archipelago, these are thousands of islands that people have, intermarried, cross-pollinated, traded, waged wars.
So much history.
So much history.
Yeah,
right?
so much history.
So in some ways, I would say that it is a fundamentally almost anti-Nusantaran idea to have to essentialize your identity into one thing. Even if, for example, right, like I look at an old copper plate etching of an ancestor of mine, a Suluk ancestor, he will be wearing like an Arab turban, a Chinese jacket, some pants from the Coromandel coast in India. Do you know what I mean? This is like the 1800s.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, it's almost like, in some ways, in this world, when we're more globalized and more connected, we're trying to go backwards. Cling on to these kind of ossified ideas of
It's the biggest
identity.
irony of all, where we live in a time when we have access to so much information and knowledge.
Yeah.
Yet we shrink ourselves to just our own comfortable silos. That this is all that I am, and I'm so much more.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, and also you would know from living in Sarawak, like in Sabah, everybody is mixed. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
That's the thing.
Yeah,
As soon as you scratch the surface, it's just like every person you know is like a whole blend of different cultures, ethnic groups, identities, and I think that's to be celebrated. And I was sort of trying to do this almost in a stylistic way with this book as well.
Yeah.
Use all different forms, all the different weapons that I had in my arsenal. Elements of historical fiction, elements of surrealism, magic realism, even speculative fiction, ghost stories. Take a kind of borderless approach to writing that also reflects my identity.
In fact, when I was reading the book, when I saw that part we were talking about ghost stories, I interviewed somebody called, he's a Malaysian author, his name is Tanjit Singh.
Okay.
And he wrote this book called Abandoned Gods. First thing I told him was like, your book has the best title I've ever heard in my life.
Wow.
It's like a title for like a Slayer album or whatever. And the book basically talks about how It's a fictional story about a woman carrying her child through a forest in, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's in Sarawak, trying to get to the Miri General Hospital because the child is severely ill.
Right.
And in that journey through the forest, she meets all these Sarawakian gods.
Wow.
Right? It's a beautifully written book.
Oh man, I would love to read that.
Yeah, Abandoned Gods. Yeah. So it's like, and when I read that, I was like, wow, there's so much culture in my own country that I am not aware of. Because as we grew up here in Malaya, our thought is that this is the only Malaysia. The rest, Sabah and Sarawak are on the fringes. They are just there for the oil.
Yes.
kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I want to go into one thing which isn't part of the book, but it definitely ties into this. Because to me, when I read it, this is more of a political novel.
Okay.
I don't know whether you would agree with that, but that's the kind of thing I get because I like the minute political sort of stories or landscape elements where you throw in. For example, like there is one scene where the grandmother is listening to Tun Mahathir talking on the radio. I was like, wow, that's interesting.
Right.
Now you have said this, and I quote, "Politics is the most frightening force of all, scarier than any spectre."
Oh. I wonder when I said that. Oh, The thing is, I do. You know, when you do so many interviews over like 20
say a lot
years,
of things. Yeah,
you say a lot of things. But I still agree with it.
What do you think politics has done to Sabah?
Well, I mean, we got the elections coming up.
That's why I'm asking this question.
And it's entirely, confounding and confusing to me. And I don't know if this makes me un-Sabahan, but I would venture to say that a lot of my Sabahan friends would not be able to be across all the various political parties, all of the allegiances that seem to shapeshift and change.
Yes.
Like sometimes I'm just like, wow, those two people have formed a coalition. I thought they would never talk to each other again,
And then tomorrow they form another coalition.
Yeah, exactly.
How many coalitions do you have?
It's crazy. I'm not sure I can, without having lived there for a long period of time, it's difficult for me to answer that question. I would venture to say that the way that the corruption has run rampant for so long has really affected like the psyche and the soul of people, because it is sort of seems to be throughout the system.
Okay.
And I don't want to talk out of school, but I would venture to say that this is one of these things where it trickles down from the top. Right?
As in the problems trickle down from the top.
Problems trickle down from the top.
Yeah, definitely.
The people I would point the finger way more at a person who has power and uses it badly than someone on like a street level who is corrupt, even though that's bad as well, right? So for instance, I can say that in KK, right, I knew someone that got like arrested for having shabu, methamphetamines. It's illegal, okay?
Yeah, it is.
But it is super common practice for just, if someone gets arrested, they just say, just give us 500 ringgit. Like they take the IC card, and then they'll be like, we won't give it back until you give us the 500 ringgit, right? That's terrible, okay? Surely that's a terrible sign of, where a society is going when that type of thing is common practice. However, I would venture to say that all of these attitudes and the way that people behave in this way, it trickles down
exactly.
from above.
And I think one character in your book that sort of, again, is you could bring that same sort of analysis to him or the same sort of interpretation to his character is Yusuf.
Yes.
Because despite him being he's sort of like the antagonist of this book, but he's a deeply human man. That he does face conflicts for his actions and all that, internal conflicts. But do you think that Yusuf and this example that you just gave are created by the society?
Yes.
It's created by a flawed, I would say purposely flawed system, intentionally flawed system, right? So can you really blame them that they are like, because the question I was thinking when I was reading about Yusuf is he made by the system or is he enabling it?
Yeah, well, I mean, this gets to the heart of something I was trying to ask in this book is, are we complicit through choice or through coercion?
Yeah.
And does that coercion come from the society around us? And I would venture to say a lot of the times it does, although of course we have our own individual agency. You can't just, of course. It's an explanation, but it's not always an excuse. But also going back to your previous question, I think we have to connect this with the colonial history as well, because the British North Borneo Chartered Company unlike say the Brooks in Sarawak, who at least were sort of pretending to like maybe put a few things in this weird sort of benign, benevolent dictator type way, right?
Creating their own system.
Creating their own system. But the chartered company was like, we're making no bones about this. We are here for the minerals and the logs and the oil,
We don't care about you.
We don't care, right? And so there's even a book I read in researching this that was called something like the economic stagnation of British North Borneo or something like that. And it was all about during that period. There's sort of basically like economic mismanagement and when someone's there just to kind of just take. And so we can't separate the modern era from that era. Like when that has been set up as a system, of course in a post-independence era, people are going to behave in a certain way and probably think, like Yusuf, well, look, they made all this money.
Why can't
now
I?
We're an independent nation.
Yeah.
The logging trade is roaring.
Yeah.
Why can't I get a piece of the pie? And so in some ways, I sort of get it. Like when I tell people what my book's about, oftentimes people say of my age will be like, it was messed up, but I sort of get it. Like, I understand why our fathers.
He was just playing by the rules of the game.
Exactly.
Yeah, Yusuf
playing
was,
by the rules that you were given.
Yeah.
And so, this is another thing I wanted to interrogate was that kind of rift or schism between generations, right? Because one thing that inspired the book was that I'd meet people, say, of my age, Western educated Sabahans or Sarawakians, but also you could expand it more than that, like Western educated Filipinos or Indonesians, whatever, who are very environmentally conscious, all about protecting the rainforest and, green issues, sustainability. But then when you scratch the surface a little bit, the reason they had been educated in the West was that their father usually was involved in some
sort of
deeply unscrupulous kind of extractive, mining or forestry or something. And so there was this kind of schism between them in a way, and shame and secrets that are definitely like ripe for fiction.
So do you feel that perhaps this system is like one of those things, like a monster that, so it's like that movie Venom, when when his hands sort of extend out, that no matter how much you try to get away from it, it's going to reach out to you and pull you back in.
It seems to be. And again, look, I don't know enough about the way the internal gadgetry of the politics works, but conversations that I've had, I've been like, well, how does this change, And I think in so many sort of places around the world you see, it's sort of about like this older generation. It's almost like they're a lost cause, an older generation of politicians and public figures and everything, because they're so acculturated into a certain way. And I guess it's like this younger generation that sort of has to come through, and you hope that they can sort of break that circuit.
Yeah.
Of course, and I think that does happen, right? Because there is a difference growing up. Say, I think we're about the same age. I'm 41.
Oh,
so,
right. I'm 40.
Right, and so there is a difference. Like when you grow up in this era, like the attitude towards Malaysian politics, for example. I noticed that with my friends. They didn't have as much of this kind of rose-tinted view like of Malaysia than say like my parents' generation, who could also sort of sink into complacency like a little bit. Do you know what I mean?
In terms of, what do you mean? Complacent
towards the people in power.
I see.
So, for example, like when in the book there's the auntie sort of sitting there nodding along to Dr. M, just saying, "Oh yeah, betul, like just any received knowledge is just like, oh yeah, well it must be right because it's coming from above.
You,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like when I started coming back in like 1920. Sorry, not in 1920. When I was 19,
sounded like that. I was thinking too.
When I was 19.
I'm a time traveler. I did tell you that.
There wasn't this type of thing as much, in amongst the people of my age. They were just like, no, the system's messed up. It has been for a long time. We do not take any of there's more cynicism in a way. And I guess you hope that kind of bleeds into a newer generation of people going into politics, I suppose, that sort of have like different attitudes and different types of input.
But interesting you say that because...
But I don't know. I'm interested in your view on this.
Yeah, because-
Does anything I'm saying resonate, or do you think I'm on the wrong?
No, I think it is something that some people think. I think there's vast amount of people think that. I think they sort of echo what you're saying. But when you talk about the legacy of our colonial past, when you talk about, a system that coerces us to do what is in the best interest of us as opposed to what's the best interest for the group or for all of humanity. You look at, for example, the example of the comparison between Yusuf and Harun. Yusuf cuts down trees.
Yes.
Harun then goes on to extract data and relies on outsourced cheap labor.
Yeah.
So both basically benefit from the systems that enslave or not enslave, but sort of impose a huge cost on humans and our surrounding environment,
Yes.
right? So again, but when you look at this, Harun went abroad to a place where colonialism was not much of a factor, where he had a choice to do what he was supposed to do. He
Right.
could have gone the route of maybe doing things which are better, despite him seeing some horrors of what his father had done. So again, it reminds me of like the story of the Emperor's New Clothes.
Right.
It's new because you're telling me it's new.
Yes.
So I'm in data. My father logged trees, but it's new. So again, I wonder if this inclination or this propensity to destruction is just our nature, and we are blaming systems, politicians, but it's human nature that's the problem.
I'm not sure about that because, like, for example,
Sorry, that was a long question.
no.
Sorry.
It's a good question. It's got me thinking, because I think obviously there is that part of human nature that is extractive and exploitative, but I think oftentimes we're sold a myth that is so part of our nature that everything that has happened that has been unjust was almost like a historical inevitability, right? So I think about, for example, with Australian history, the terrible way that the British people came to Australia and treated Aboriginal people. That sometimes is seen, I would say, by people who are sort of prejudiced anyway, or acting or thinking in bad faith, that was some type of historical inevitability in a way that when you are more powerful than another people, you'll take them over.
Yeah.
But in our history, we had a little known when I was growing up, the Makassans from South Sulawesi. They were trading peacefully with the Aboriginal people from Northern Australia for like hundreds of years. And they had like technological advancements and everything like that. But they didn't think, just because there are a lot of us and maybe we have these technological tools, we are just going to come in and take over this place and replace it. There are alternate histories, and then in Sabah, Indigenous people's connection to land and forest and those knowledge systems of how to care for land, that stands in stark opposition, I would say, to what you're saying, that it's just in nature to sort of destroy and take over. I mean, having said that, there's a long history also of intertribal warfare and everything in Sabah. So I recognise these are complex issues.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that sometimes it's easy to give into that because we see so much kind of injustice around the world that it's like, wow, should we just throw up our hands? But I think for me, even though most of my life I've verged on being a bit of a pessimist, I would say, and this book, I think it's clear-eyed, about these issues.
It is.
But I've seen little glimmers of hope in Sabah, and I sort of chose, in a way, to try and magnify that or the possibility of that.
But is that you seeing glimmer of hope your way of matching these sort of glimmers, that you want your hope to be answered, so you jump on these minute things that happen, as opposed to confronting the absolute truth that perhaps profit wins at the end of the day?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've spoken to people, for example, who are working to build corridors, like replant trees to build corridors between fragmented sections of rainforest so that the animals can move more freely and there's more biodiversity and whatnot. And I would say that they offer a glimmer of hope, but they're also very clear-eyed. So I've adopted, they will say, look, palm oil is the most productive kind of crop basically in the world. You can turn over a profit really quickly. The companies are here to stay. We have to figure out a way of balancing and kind of working with these companies. And I think that's a very pragmatic kind of Sabahan approach that still maintains like the hope and possibility of some regeneration, but is also kind of like, look, there is also we have to have an economy and we have to bring money into it.
Yeah. People need jobs. Yeah, people need salaries.
Create jobs. Yeah. Like there are people I met, I remember in Tawau Hills National Park, who were just like, look, if we did what the Westerners want us to do and just basically ban all palm oil, can you imagine what would happen to Sabah? Like, can you imagine like...
Which is already the poorest state in the country.
Which is already the poorest state in the country. Can you imagine like the number of people that would be unemployed, having to go back to illegal logging, illegal hunting practices, whatever it is. Like, these things are far more complex, I think, and I think that kind of, let's call it hopeful pragmatism, is something that inspires me.
Fair enough. It's a good thing to have. Look, but one very important character I feel in this book, for me particularly, was Salam.
Yeah.
So Salam is a local man that's harmed by Yusuf's logging operations. I won't go into detail there. I think you guys can read the book and find out yourself. Very interesting. And in fact, what happens to him has a huge impact on the children. That's why they leave, right? Roz and Harun leave. So what are you trying to tell readers through the character of Salam and through his role in the story? What are you trying to say?
I think... I said before that Crazy Auntie was kind of like the moral heart of the book in a lot of ways, but that's more in terms of someone who challenges the status quo, is a free thinker, is a kind of eccentric, radical intellectual, you know. So it's more on that side of things, and showing like a different intellectual path that could be taken. But having said that, I think Salam and also Pachi Abdul Hamid, the uncle, are the moral heart in a different way, in terms of respecting local knowledges, languages, ways of thinking, indigenous forms of kind of philosophy and consensus, and they are the only ones really in the book, despite what Roz and Harun say, who really care about the hutan, about the forest, and have a deep kind of understanding of it in a close, intimate way. And so I think that's what I was sort of trying to show with those types of characters, is the tragedy of the mistreatment of those people, but also, again, maybe a potential alternate history that doesn't have to follow the lines of just rampant abuse and extraction.
You do talk about, because this book, you do use multiple languages. You do talk about loss of culture.
Yes.
Especially unique to Sabah, particularly in this case, because this book takes place in Sabah. I wonder if Sabah's current cultural bank, if you will, right, the wide spectrum of cultures they have, is at risk of being lost to corporate profit. The thirst for profit. Because if you look even now, like we discussed this earlier about how the Penan tribe and how they are losing areas to actually move into, right? And the how Salam was pushed aside, in the face of huge corporate giants, seems like these people don't have a chance.
Yeah.
So in a way, is it that if this system continues, you could see maybe decades down the road that Sabah's history, Sabah's future may be rewritten by these corporations? I
think a lot of people fear that, and I fear that, whether it be in Australia or in Sabah.
Yeah.
Because if I can use the sort of metaphor of a rainforest, this is a metaphor I took from my mentor Yi Ilan. I don't know if you heard of it, but amazing Sabahan artist. And she sort of talked about how in the rainforest there is biodiversity. There is this kind of richness in diversity that uplifts every other sort of being. And even if you go into the hutan and you listen, it's really loud. There are so many different types of voices.
Yeah.
But if that biodiversity is replaced by a monocrop like palm oil, you go in there and it's silent, and then it is so destructive to the land because it can't regenerate, it can't re-enrich itself.
Yeah.
And everything else really suffers outside of, I guess, the person making the almighty dollar.
Yes. He does very well.
But what gets lost? What gets lost in the samangat, in the spirit of a place when a rainforest is replaced by a monocrop? And so that equally goes for culture and language, So that was why it was so important at a certain point in this book. Crazy Auntie has this dream of translating a small, simple poem into every spoken language of Sabah, over 50, which meant that I, as the author, then had to try and follow in her footsteps and try and do that. And I was very naive, because when you go to Sabah, there's a big deal made of like, oh, we have all these different languages and blah, blah. But actually, a lot of them are not preserved. There's not funding oftentimes put into preserving the languages. BM and English are gaining such hegemony that a lot of them are sort of facing erasure, And so, for example, like I went into the Sabah State Library and went to look for dictionaries of the local languages. There was probably only 4, I think. The Kadazan one was like really big, thick, like really well put together, funded and everything. Then there was a couple of other ones, I think one Murut dialect, one Kinabatangan one. But it meant that I had to sort of actually go out seeking people. For 3.5 years, I dedicated myself to this, just for this little passage in the book. It's about 16 pages long, and try and translate this poem into as many of the languages as I could. I ended up getting about 16, which it doesn't sound like that much, but it was pretty good going, I had to really go out there in the field, make friends of friends, meet people on WhatsApp. It was actually an amazing adventure. But I do, for example, have a translation into Penang in the book. That's amazing, And so I think it was just trying to play my little part in sort of preserving and also celebrating that type of diversity, because I think we all lose when all these different cultures are potentially facing erasure and replaced by one.
Interesting theme that you also talk about is how Roz and Harun, the characters in this book, they inherit the father's wealth.
Right.
Are they complicit in the crimes that he has committed?
I think so. I mean, one of the questions that comes up, like I think Crazy Auntie brings up a kind of Sufi folkloric tale, and it's about, can good come from bad? Can good come from a bad deed or even an evil deed? And I don't think I come to any resolution on that. But I think what I'm driving towards there is that, yes, they are complicit. Of course they are. If you're inheriting and taking extremely ill-gotten wealth, but firstly, no money is clean. We all know that.
Okay.
I think, and every rags to riches story, I say, is fertilized by blood in some way, or a screwing over of someone. Usually many people. So yes, they are complicit. But I think what I was interested in was asking the question, if privilege is also a resource, how then do we choose to spend it? So you can spend it to reinforce the status quo, reinforce oppression, but I think you can also use privilege to challenge that. And so that's what they're grappling with, especially towards the end of the book. How then will we use that inheritance? And I think on small scales, we all grapple with that. For instance, like most of my cousins grew up on the palm oil plantations in Felda, in like Lahadatu and all that. It's a tough life out there, very tough life. I grew up in Australia. I went to a private school, So there's kind of, that's a lot of privilege that I had compared to the rest of my family.
Exactly.
And so, again, that's about taking a clear-eyed view, and hopefully maybe with, again, this thing of this kind of like a grain of optimism, and saying, no, while that means that I have to be aware of that, I can also use that hopefully for good, and not to reinforce those institutions, which I hated. But
really?
I'm also a product. I'm also kind of a product of them.
Yeah.
But you can use that privilege, as many people have done in the past, to challenge them. I mean, even Che Guevara, right? He was a middle-class dude. He grew up, he was a trained doctor.
Exactly.
Things like, not that I'm Che Guevara, but you know what I'm saying? The point remains, right? People can be of privilege and then use it to challenge those institutions. So.
Yeah. Okay, so again, the last character that I've, again in this book, who plays a big role is the forest.
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
The forest is not, the environment is not passive, it is a witness. So what is the role of the forest in this book?
I'm glad you just said it. That's what I was driving towards. It's not passive, it's a witness. It has its own agency, it has its own spirit. It's something to be respected. It's not something just to be chopped down, exploited, extracted from. And I think that's why I made it its own character, because in some ways that was also upturning this kind of heart of darkness attitude that the hutan is there just to somehow represent the dark soul of man, or just be in the background. No, I wanted to foreground it. I wanted to give it its own voice so it could speak for itself. It's playful, it's kind of funny and imaginative, but it's also vengeant and violent and aggressive, and to be respected, you know. I had this dumb idea once that I'll probably never do, like a bucket list thing. I once read on some random blog that you can do this. He called it like the horizontal Everest, where you can walk from the east coast of Borneo directly across to the west coast, right? Can you imagine like going through that jungle? Like basically in the blog, it was like if you break your leg halfway through Kalimantan or whatever, you're done for. You will definitely die. And so, while I do, there's definitely this romanticized notion of the forest as being abundant and giving and generous. It's also it's a violent place. You or I could not just be dropped in the middle of
Kalimantan. I would not survive. I would not survive.
In a half day or one day, probably.
I'll be my phone. Where's the reception? Come on, take me out.
So I was trying to, but there's no reception. Well, actually, so I was good. This guy, when he wrote the blog, he said there's no reception, so you're screwed. Okay, but now what's crazy is that I've been in like barrio in the Kalabit Highlands in the hutan, and I can still get, I can still be on my Instagram or whatever. It's like, damn, man, it's crazy. But yeah, so I was trying to siphon all those different things into the voice of the forest, so that it could kind of speak for itself and be a character alongside all of these other ones.
Okay, now let's go to this in terms of the themes that you touch in this book. So you touch themes like environment, identity, colonialism, capitalism. Which one do you think, in your opinion, is the one that we should address the most with the most urgency?
Oh wow. I mean, they're all
interconnected.
They're all completely interconnected. I think that's what I was trying to say, especially at a global level, by having sections of the book set in Nigeria, Australia, and Sabah, was talking about this interconnected ecosystem of colonial capitalism, identity, oppression, environmental destruction. And to show the ways that they are very tangled up kind of skeins. And so drawing them out all into different threads is probably impossible, right? But I wanted to look at those I guess what was lying underneath the surface. And so, for example, it felt important to connect some of that history of Nigeria and the palm oil trade to Sabah. Because, nowadays we are so used to these endless hours of oil palm plantations. I got the bus from Singapore to here, and it was pretty much the whole entire way. It was just row after row after row of palm oil, and same in Sabah. I grew up in palm oil estates, Right. Yeah. So, same thing in Sabah. And so we almost feel like it's so omnipresent that it's just it's of this place, but it's not. It's from West Africa, and it was brought originally to Indonesia by the Dutch, I think, and then the British took it here, and it's got deep roots, pun intended, in West Africa, and that when the slave trade finished, oftentimes those people that were in the slave trade then simply sort of pivoted to oil palm and used exactly the same networks and rivers to transport oil palm. So it felt really important for me to show that we're not just existing in a vacuum here in Malaysia and in Sabah. It's connected to a whole ecosystem of trade and exploitation.
I wonder if you would agree with me. I don't know, but when we talk about the ecological harm that we bring to Sabah, right? And we talk about, and Sabah and Sarawak are home to such lush and deep jungles that, are being, as you said, being slowly chopped away. And despite all the warning signs about global warming, rising sea levels, all the things that are happening around us that we can see in the news, that we know it's being done by us. And yet we are not changing those practices. I feel like, do you think that change will only come at the precipice of our own death, or our own, destruction or death? So when it comes to that point where it's either die or survive, then only will we make the change to be more environmentally conscious and try to find new and interesting ways to not, plunder jungle and then plant oil palm.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I do. Oftentimes I really fear that, because even on a personal level, like with our own health or something, there'll be people who are like, they'll only go to the doctor once they got cancer, it's just like, so like, or whatever, once they're dealing with some crazy heart condition that's from, maybe not smoking a pack of cigarettes a day and eating unhealthily or whatever. And then by that point, it's like almost irreversible.
Too late,
Do you know what I mean? Like, so I see on a mass scale, sometimes I'm like, I could imagine a scenario for sure where that occurs, where it's just
interesting that you say that
it's too late.
Interesting you say that, because do you think that based on your study and your living in Sabah, do you think all the ecological harm is final? That it can't be reversed?
I mean,
have you seen anything, any signs of hope that things can be reversed?
Yeah, I mean, I have. I would say some of these replantings, connecting the fragmented rainforests and everything, that's a good start. Stuff like, I was out in Pulau Pompom, which is like an island off Semporna, and there was a reef there that had been fish bombed to 0% coral. So entirely fish bombed, which is a whole other story, because oftentimes, the local fishermen will fish bomb because of poverty, and maybe a lack of education and things like that. But there's a group out there, Track Borneo, who are trying to figure out ways of kind of rebuilding sections of the reef so that it has structural integrity and so that the coral can kind of grow back over it and regenerate. And I saw with my own eyes, because I went there pre-pandemic, and then after the pandemic, because everything shut down and the reef was given a tiny moment to sort of breathe, that it had actually, the coral had regenerated in certain sections, and turtles were coming back, different types of fish and everything. So I saw rays of hope on the tiniest scale, and so, but I think writ large, if there's like a better balance between civil society, business, politicians, and better practices, then some of those hopefully can be magnified to a bit of a larger scale. I mean, even something like ecotourism. I mean, some people are figuring out that these things should actually be kept and maintained, and they can bring some money in as well. You can kind of have your cake and eat it, hopefully. But so much of it's been destroyed, right? Like, I think I sometimes hear estimates that it's like 95% of primary rainforest in Borneo has been destroyed. And for what, obviously for money, but some of it is just so outrageously obscene. Like I was listening to a podcast about in Kalimantan, there's all these forests being chopped down so that rich Americans can have the wood grain in their SUVs, And that's, do you know what I mean? Like on the dashboard, like in those luxury cars and stuff like that. And so they're like chopping down, forests in Kalimantan for that. Is that necessary?
Man, that's
do you know
crazy,
what I mean?
Man. Speaking of which, what are sort of like the conversations that you want people to have after reading Fierceland by Omar Musa?
Man, I mean, I was grappling with so many big issues with this, right? Like, because there's the whole other thing we didn't mention, which is that a fair chunk of the book is set in Australia in the post 9/11 era, and it deals with kind of Islamophobia and how the two siblings experience it differently, one being a girl, one being a boy. I think one of the things that I aim for with a book is that you can hopefully see the world with new eyes, or see the world at least in a new light.
Yeah.
So questions that I guess we've covered some of the big ones, like what do we do? What do we choose to do with our privilege if privilege is a resource? How do you contend or mourn for a person you love deeply who is also a really horrible person?
Mm-hmm.
How do we grapple with the ghosts of the past? This idea of complicity, do we do it through choice or coercion? I think these are like large questions that I want people to ask.
Okay. All right, guys. So that is Mr. Omar Musa there with his book, Fierceland. Look, guys, it's a fantastic book. It's available now. So we'll be sharing all the links to how you can buy the books. And it's a fantastic read. It's an amazing story. And I find you, the author, even more amazing. And I want to have you back on.
Man, I'd love
Let's
to
discuss
come back
other
on.
topics and, about racism, Australia, Islamophobia.
Yeah.
Let's have more discussion. So next time you're back in KL, hit me up, man. Let's do it.
That'd be awesome. And all your listeners, thanks for listening. And this isn't actually the cover of the book.
It's a beautiful cover, actually.
Yeah.
It's just that I was given this copy. But
this is the advanced reading copy.
Yeah.
But yeah, really appreciate you taking the time, man.
No, man, I love
awesome.
the book, guys. So again, get your copy, Fierceland, especially to us Malaysians. It's a story that takes place in a land that we all love. I love Sabah so much. I've been there so many times, and just it's a fictional story, but it really confronts the real questions, I feel. And it's fantastic. So well done to you, buddy. So guys, that was Omar Musa again. Thank you again to Penguin Southeast Asia. We have many, many more amazing guests coming from Penguin, as well as local politicians to discuss modern politics and what's happening in Malaysia. So we'll see you soon. Take care.